Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about El Greco, a very peculiar person and maybe we could say somebody ahead of his time. Actually, El Greco was rescued from obscurity during the 19th century, and he was not very popular during the 18th century. El Greco gets its name from his origin, the Greek. And since his name was a little bit more difficult to pronounce, Domenico Theotokopoulos, they decided to call him the Greek, El Greco. He was actually a painter, sculptor, and an architect of the Spanish Renaissance. He never forgot his origins, and he used to sign with his name in Greek letters, again, Domenicos Theotokopoulos, and sometimes he would use Kres, which means from Crete, his hometown. El Greco is a person that basically worked in religious themes. He's also popular for his big compositions, as for example in this Adoration of the Shepherds, that contains actually a circular composition and not triangular, if you remember, that was typical of the Renaissance. And you can also observe that the tiny Jesus in the middle makes a huge contrast with the size of the rest of the people. However, the baby is the center of attention because the light seems to come from him and not to him. Okay? He also has different figures, a very big collection of figures of saints, as in these Tears of Saint Peter. About his life, he was born in Crete, and at the time, Crete was part of the Republic of Venice and the center of post-Byzantine art. He became a master at 22 and he was trained at icon painting. What does icon painting mean? It's the representation of different saints, Christ, or the Virgin Mary, plus some narrative scenes, like, for example, baptism or the crucifixion. He decided to travel at the age of 26 to Venice. From this time, unfortunately, we don't have too many paintings left. We have these two, St. Luke painting the Virgin or the Dormition of the Virgin. And as you can see, they are not kept in a very good state. When he arrived to Venice, he was employed in the workshop of Titian, so he must have been quite talented and they could see his talent, but he was also quite influenced by Tintoretto. The two of them were very important masters of the Renaissance, so El Greco was not as famous or as popular as he would have liked to. From that time period, he learned the call to color, how to use very vivid color in his paintings, the poetic contemplation of landscape, which means how to paint landscape with a bucolic type of view, the exaltation of richness, which means that there is a lot of detail, and the importance of secondary themes. You can see all that in this beautiful painting, Christ Healing the Blind Man, where you can see all the beautiful colors that he used, the type of landscape, like very peaceful, the amount of detail everywhere, and how also there are so many things going on, it is difficult to focus in just one of them. After a study trip around Italy, he decided to settle in Rome. And he arrived there with a letter of recommendation, and maybe he was pursuing a Roman career. From there, he learned how to work under the trends of the artist Michelangelo, that was so famous in Rome. However, he was somehow disappointed by Michelangelo because he thought he was way too subtle and in shapes and color for him. However, we can see a very strong influence in this Pietà by El Greco from the Pietà by Michelangelo. About Michelangelo, this is Michelangelo, he said that he was a good man, but he did not know how to paint. Well, I don't think that gained him too many friends, so he decided to leave because this criticism towards Michelangelo may have forced his ostracism. When he arrived to Spain, he tried to work for El Escorial, which was under the rule of King Philip II, but his style was not of the king's taste. It was too advanced for the taste of the king. This painting, The Death of St. Maurice, was rejected by the king, though you can still see it at the monastery of San Lorenzo del Escorial. I'll leave you a minute with it to think what's wrong with the painting. The key to finding out is actually trying to answer the question, where's St. Maurice? Can you spot St. Maurice in this painting? Where do you think he is? Is he up there in the sky? Is he one of these guys in the center? None of them. He's actually the guy at the bottom left with his head off. So for Philip II, he said that the saints must be painted so that the desire to pray for them is not removed. So it needs to be more obvious. Okay? When El Greco was expelled from court, he had to move to Toledo, or he decided to move to Toledo, and he lived and worked there until his death. His first commission was actually for the monastery of Santo Domingo el Antiguo, where he painted the Trinity to go into one of the altarpieces. This is a painting of the Trinity, one of the most beautiful ones that he ever painted. Look at that detail, the dove, the vivid colors, the way he used to recreate the textures, different textures, and how well he could portray the skin, the dead type of skin. Remember that Jose Rivera was quite good at that? Well, when he was also in Toledo, he had a very important project commissioned by the cathedral authorities. After this project, he never worked for the church again. Once more, he found to please his new patron. Why, you may wonder? Why? What's wrong with this painting? Okay, this is one of the activities that you have to do to decide what's wrong with this painting, what was the problem, but also to work more on detail on it. In Toledo, he found new patrons and he started to work with individual people or different commissions that he arranged with the city. However, he was a little bit particular and he had feuds with different people. There are at least 9 documented lawsuits that were filed under the name of El Greco. Well, during this time period, he created as well one of his most famous paintings, and that you probably may recognize, this Burial of the Count of Orgaz. What's the story behind it? Gonzalo Ruiz, Mr. Orgaz, died actually in 1323, which is like 2 centuries before this painting was made. According to legend, his charity had been rewarded with a miracle, and then St. Stephen and St. Augustine had lowered the sky to bury him. El Greco decided to represent this scene as a mass funeral, and he decided to also split it into clearly differentiated sections, the lower one with the burial and the upper one with the glory. Both of them are united by this narrowing of clouds in between them. In this painting, we can see represented quite a few characters, some of them very well known, like the King Philip II, the Pope of the time, St. Paul, St. John, Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, quite a few of them. That's on the top part. On the lower part, we have people more attached to Earth, we could say. Most of them are friends or people that he knew, like his dear friend Diego de Covarrubias, or maybe even the same Cervantes. His son is included here. Basically, it's a whole collection of different portraits. This is considered a masterpiece since it encapsulates the object of his art, which is to suggest a different experience, a visionary experience, and to extend your imaginative faculties, not to see what is obvious. Okay? So that's why he makes this combination about the bottom, which is more classicist and tends to mannerism, with again this huge collection of portraits, the contrast of colors, the representation of the different textures in the clothing, for example, and the upper area, more intangible, more difficult to reach. Okay, that's why he used like more elongated type of forms, right? Bien. So for all these reasons, El Greco is considered like one of the most important painters. So remember the different influences in his life. The first one being where he was trained, Byzantine influence in Crete, where he learned about the anti-naturalism and the lengthening of the figures. From Venice, he learned about the use of color. In Rome, from Michelangelo, he learned about the anatomy, the occupation of space. And in Spain, he dedicated himself more to the idea of distortion, anti-classicism, fakeness, theatricality, and all those things, more connected almost to the Baroque time period rather than to the Renaissance itself. One of the most important things is that El Greco rejected naturalism and also the idea that art should be accessible to a large audience. He had more of an intellectual type of approach. And he basically did the opposite to anybody else. So that's why that gained him probably quite a few, not enemies, but also not admirers. Okay? Some other of his most famous works, this one called Laocoon, which is considered his only mythological theme, also one of his last paintings. This view of Toledo, which is also his only landscape per se. And you can see this is not the real Toledo, it's very distorted. Okay? And some more of his paintings that we are going to discuss more in detail that you can find in El Prado. For example, the Trinity that we mentioned briefly before, that you can find in the monastery, the nobleman with his hand on his chest, the adoration of the shepherds. Have a look at the details. And finally, El Greco died in Toledo on the 7th of April, 1614, and he's said to be resting in the church of Santo Domingo el Antiguo, but it's not for sure since he had one more fight before dying with the cathedral authorities, with the monastery as well, and they refused to have him buried there. However, it seems that his son arranged with the monks that his father should be buried there because he had done so much for the city, regardless his personality. And he died without leaving any testament, any will, so we don't know what his last will was. That's all for now. Thank you.